Today's episode has been brought to you by OfferingTree. I am feeling so grateful for OfferingTree this week. I use their booking software myself because it is so easy and makes things just automatic. And as I'm recording here today, I have over 65 people. I think we're now at 67 people registered for my Yoga for Pelvic Health 6-week series. And I cannot imagine if I had to do all of the registration stuff without using OfferingTree. It is an amazing all-in-one software that I recommend often to yoga teachers. And that's why they're a great fit for the podcast. If you want to check it out and grab our podcast listener discount, you go over to offeringtree.com/Shannon. Hello and welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Crow. I use she, her pronouns. And this podcast is being recorded on Anishinaabe, Odawa, and Mississauga land, also called the Bruce Peninsula in Ontario, Canada. If you are new here, you might not know that I'm also a mom of 3, a yoga teacher, podcaster, and founder of Pelvic Health Professionals. And this podcast was created for you so that each and every week you can be connected to the information and inspiration that's going to support you all through everything that you're going to run into as a yoga teacher. I get it. I remember leaving my very first yoga teacher training, which was over a year, and that was back in 2006. Oh my gosh, seems so long ago. And leaving that and thinking, okay, now what? Now I need to put together a class and get people to come to the class. There were so many things. And it felt like I was kind of dropped out into the wilderness. And if you've ever felt that as a yoga teacher, if you've ever felt isolated or alone or like you need answers to your questions, you're in the right place. And today's podcast is one that all of us can learn from. And it is thanks to and inspired by the many questions that we've gotten since our last article and podcast about insurance for yoga teachers. I'll make sure to link to both the article and the podcast that we did with Beth. At the time, Beth worked for Lackner & McLennan, and you're going to hear today how that has since been bought by BrokerLink. That's over here in Canada. So I'll link to those in our show notes in case you want some more general insurance information. Now, today's episode is inspired because we have gotten a record number of emails, comments, and posts asking about insurance for teaching abroad. And that might mean that you're traveling and teaching. So even if you're teaching online to people back home, but you're traveling, this episode is for you. Or if you're teaching online to people outside of your country, or if you're traveling somewhere and teaching people in a different location. Oh, and if you're sharing YouTube videos or Instagram reels or anything to do with yoga online as well. We touched on that as well today. And I have to tell you, in case you're like, I know everything there is about insurance. I learned a lot from Joe and Beth in this podcast interview. For instance, did you know if you are a Canadian yoga teacher and you're insured with BrokerLink, formerly Lackner & McLennan, did you know that if you have insurance with them, you have access to lawyers 24/7? Near the end of today's interview, you're going to hear Beth talk about that. I just think it's brilliant. I just want to shout it from the rooftops. Well, I guess telling you on a podcast is the next best thing. I just want to tell every yoga teacher who's Canadian, this is really worth having, where you can, get a lawyer to look over your waiver form or reach out to them if you have some questions about a possible claim. I'm also really grateful that Joe and Beth made this episode about insurance, which sometimes to some people could be said as a boring topic, that they made it very informative. It is packed with information for yoga teachers. Now, before we get into today's episode and dive into that information, I have a few announcements to share with you. If you teach yoga to people who have a pelvis, this first one is for you. This fall, we have some fantastic guest experts and topics inside of Pelvic Health Professionals. You can join and access all of these and everything else in the library up to this point by going to pelvichealthprofessionals.com. So I'll tell you what's coming up next because some of you might be interested in this specifically. In September, we're talking all about endometriosis and pelvic health with Jill Mueller, who has endometriosis and is also a pelvic health PT. Then in October, Dr. Sarah Reardon is coming in to talk with us about pelvic floor hypertension. So that's what we would see and what we do about a pelvic floor that's holding on to a lot of tension, which many of us are dealing with in our life, and some of us don't even know. In November, Libby Hinesley, who was here on the podcast talking about hypermobility, is going to come into pelvic health professionals and talk about hypermobility and pelvic health. And I'm really excited about all of these calls, especially because when we hire pelvic health experts, you get to ask them questions. You can either submit your questions or you can ask them live, and we really focus in on a specific topic, and we include all questions from members. It's a really cool place to hang out. Like I said, if you're teaching to people who have a pelvis, this is for you. To sign up, you go over to pelvichealthprofessionals.com. You can cancel anytime. It's a lot like Netflix, but better because it's all about pelvic health, which honestly, I don't know about you, but it is not covered well enough in most spaces, like the medical world, the yoga world, the birthing world. The more I learn about pelvic health, the more I think, wow, why didn't I know this before, as someone who has a pelvis myself and also as someone who teaches to people with a pelvis? Also in there, you get access to my Yoga for Pelvic Health 6-week series. So if you jump in right away, you can actually attend live with us. But if you are joining after the 6-week series is over, the great thing is that it's included as replays in the membership. I think that's it for announcements. Let's dig in today and talk about insurance. This is a discussion we all need to have to make sure that we are taking care of our business and ourselves as yoga teachers. So way back in episode 105, we had Beth McVeigh on the podcast to explain a bit more about insurance for yoga teachers, the coverage we should have, the questions we should ask, and a lot has happened since then, mainly COVID and living in a pandemic. And more teachers are offering yoga classes online than ever before. And a lot of you are asking if you're covered when people are tuning in from another country, or maybe they're watching a video you shared on YouTube or Instagram. And some of you are getting out in the world again, traveling and teaching, or teaching to people in different countries. Now, that is why I invited Beth McVeigh and Joe Fagan to talk with us about what we need to be aware of in terms of insurance as yoga teachers, and specifically now in COVID times and teaching internationally. So you might already know Beth from the previous episode, but for those who are new here, Beth is a commercial insurance manager specializing in insurance for complementary health practitioners, studio, clinic, and spa owners who are based in Canada. Along with her experienced and knowledgeable team of insurance advisors, Beth helps clients navigate the insurance coverage they need for their practice. And Joe Fagan is the Director of Strategic Partnerships for Beyogi. He helps to create relationships within the yoga community to generate exposure for all involved. Joe is a US-based insurance provider for yoga teachers. That's why I'm really excited today that we get to hear about, how does Canada deal with this with regards to insurance? What about the US? Now, if you are a listener outside of North America and you're like, oh gosh, why didn't Shannon cover my country? I think you'll be able to take this information and ask your insurance provider. You still need to do that anyway, even if you're based within the US or Canada. But today's episode is going to cover the basic information so that you know that you're covered and you know the questions to ask to make sure you're covered. Also, a shout out of thank you. I do this shout out of thank you as well in the interview. Lizzie, who is a member of Beyogi as well, I had the privilege of meeting her and Joe at the Yoga Teacher Conf in Denver, Colorado. Thank you so much, Allison, for making that happen. And I just have to say that these two people really are about collaborating and working with yoga teachers. So if you are a US-based yoga teacher, we have a coupon code actually for you for Beyogi. So you can get a little discount if you're not already with them. And I would highly recommend checking them out. Now, if you are a yoga teacher who, let's say you teach yoga teacher trainings, or you have a studio, or you are teaching yoga teachers, also connect with them, because Beyogi has a membership where they partner with yoga teachers who are working with other yoga teachers. Alrighty, Beth and Joe are going to share all kinds of things today about teaching online, traveling and teaching to people back home, legal considerations, waivers, COVID. Let's dig right into this now. Welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast, Joe and Beth. It's so great to have you both here today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're excited.
So I want to dive right into the biggest question that we keep getting from connected yoga teachers, which is, how can I teach internationally? Whether that's online, whether we're traveling, whether we're moving, or just staying in a location for an extended period of time. But before we get into that, let's talk about what is yoga insurance, and maybe you can also tell our listeners, what gets you excited about helping yoga teachers with their yoga insurance. Joe, do you want to go first?
Sure. No, thank you. And again, thank you, Shannon, for giving us this opportunity to speak to your audience, and just appreciate the relationship we've developed over time. And it's very exciting to be here. And thank you for allowing us. So, at the end of the day, yoga insurance, or liability insurance for yoga instructors, it's ultimately all designed for protection. There's typically several different components within yoga insurance. And that's why, really, depending on the business that you're running and what your business is going to look like in the next 6 months to a year, there's various options within the space. You're going to want to understand what your business is and what you might need. Most programs come with at least a combination of professional and general liability insurance. Professional being, like a light malpractice insurance. If a client gets hurt due to the instructor's negligence, that's covered under a professional liability. And the other main component is general liability, and that's what a lot of people call trip and fall insurance. And those claims, those are unforeseeable claims, because a lot of folks in our industry are very good at what they do, very great instructors. They aren't hurting anybody, but it's really hard to foresee that freak accident, water spill, somebody falls and hits their head. So general and professional liability are typically involved. Sometimes you'll see in programs things like rental damage insurance, which would satisfy if you're renting a space, things like product coverage, or not rental damage, but identity theft, or even equipment coverage can be a part of some components. And some have some other ones. And so, at the end of the day, that's what it comes with. And why we are so interested in this space is, first off, we're all yogis. We all love this space. We all love doing the practice of it. We all everybody, at least in our company, is in some piece of the health and wellness space, whether it's massage, yoga, or what have you. But immersing ourselves into yoga and finding ways where we can work with yoga instructors and ultimately protect them what can be a catastrophic event. That's really why we're here. That's what drives us. Sorry for the long answer, but that's my take.
Super helpful. Beth, tell us a little bit about why it's important that yoga teachers are getting insurance, and what gets you excited about doing this work.
I think Joe said it beautifully. He's right. Like, just making sure that yoga instructors are properly covered. I mean, they work hard to build a practice. They work hard to get their clients to come in the door. So making sure that they're well protected. A lot of the packages are nicely designed to make sure that the instructors have coverage for a lot of the scenarios that could occur. So just making sure that they have the proper coverage down the road. Knock on wood, we haven't seen a lot of yoga instructors claims that are too bad coming through, but we are definitely heading into a new age of claims. So it's good to make sure that they're properly covered for it.
That's amazing. So just to clarify for our listeners, we have two representatives here from the US. So Joe is with Beyogi and Beth is with BrokerLink, formerly Lackner and McLennan. So Joe is in the US, Beth is in Canada, and that's why I'm excited that we're going to be talking about international. Now, obviously, this covers us, here in Canada and the US. And if you're a yoga teacher outside of this space, or really even if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, that's exactly me, please still call, your insurance company that you have now or a few insurance companies and ask a lot of questions around this. But we'll get into some of the main questions here. So our connected yoga teachers, a lot of them are teaching online now, whether that's full on, all online, or partially online since the pandemic. And so, Joe, what do you tell yoga teachers when they ask you, how can I teach internationally online? Is there a difference of it being live? Is there a difference of who signs up? And is there a difference of it being pre-recorded?
That's an excellent question. And of course, the pandemic has really accelerated this whole movement into online teaching, the need for coverage or protection from pre-recorded videos and the like. And so we've had to really, as a business, address this dramatic shift into moving from face-to-face, or at least moving a portion of your business to this online model. Luckily, we always had coverage for live face-to-face. We always had coverage for live online. The pandemic afforded us the ability to add coverage for pre-recorded videos. Now, all of that being said, our program is designed for US-based audience and US-based instructors. Every country has different laws and regulations about insurance. So to find something that can cross country lines very easily without any additional endorsements written is very difficult, but it's possible. So what we recommend to our customers that are either moving to international, or even if they're just teaching and pre-recording their videos and they're expecting maybe an international audience to watch those videos, we recommend a couple of things. Number one, it's very crucial to any type of online environment to have some type of disclaimer or waiver that can be signed before admitting somebody into that. That is going to protect you from the vast majority of any type of claim that could potentially be filed. So that's first step. Make sure you have a strong disclaimer. Make sure you're having your folks sign strong waivers. And those waivers really need to talk about everything you're doing in the class, the risks of everything you're doing, the potential outcomes of those risks, and releasing the instructor of liability from those. On the flip side, in addition to that, you mentioned about international coverage. So maybe they're going for a retreat or what have you. We recommend, so because our policy really is bound by a country code, what we tell our customers and what they do is they take our policy, they go to a local agent. I always recommend find a local agent that you trust, because there's going to be some ancillary, some gap coverage that you're always going to need for these various ventures that you do. Bring our policy to that local agent and tell them, hey, I'm spending a week in Costa Rica or whatever it may be. Can I get an endorsement? Can I get a rider? Can I get some type of coverage that extends my policy here over there? And they'll typically find you the best solution for that. I hope that answered your question. If there's more to it, please let me know.
That definitely did. And I'm wondering if you have anything to add to that, Beth. And also, it just got me thinking about, what if you're the yoga teacher who's making a random Instagram video and you don't know who's watching it? So, Beth, what is it like for our Canadian yoga teachers who reach out to BrokerLink?
Right. So yeah, it is very important if a yoga instructor is going to be teaching online to people that are outside of Canada, or posting videos where they're not able to keep tabs of who exactly is watching the videos or have control over who has access to the videos. We do have a product called the International Web-Based Consulting, which allows practitioners to operate online systems and extends the coverages. But again, lawsuits have to be brought back to Canada, which means that it has to be settled in a Canadian court. So it's not guaranteed that those claims are going to be covered if the lawsuit's not brought back into Canada. But it is something that we do see very often. The international web-based consulting, though, you have to physically be in Canada, which I know a lot of people get very confused about. Just because you have access to other people outside of Canada, you still physically have to be in Canada in order for that coverage to apply.
So just to clarify, as a Canadian yoga teacher, I could teach an online class once a week and be covered. But the moment I travel, like let's say I went on holiday and I taught from somewhere else, even though it's my same group of people, am I getting this right?
Yes, you're getting that right. You are not covered once you physically leave Canada. For our policy, sorry. Once you physically leave Canada, our policy does not respond. If you are going to teach outside of Canada for up to, I would say only 2 weeks is really the longest I've ever seen our insurance provider allow extensions. And it's all on a one-on-one. So you'd have to contact us, advise us of what you're doing, where you're teaching. There's a lot of questions involved. And then we take it to the insurance company to see if there's any way they would extend coverage for that time period.
Okay, this is so helpful. And this is why it is so important for our yoga teachers who are listening to just, that's what your insurance company is there for. They're there to answer your questions. So just call them.
Right. And it's important too to know, like for us, our policy will cover you anywhere within Canada. You can teach from province to province. It does not matter. The coverage will follow you wherever you go. However, once you step outside of Canada, that coverage is not going to follow you.
Okay, that's super clear. Joe, how is it then for our U.S. teachers? Are they covered all across the U.S.?
Yeah, so it varies exactly the same as Beth. Beth's policies lines up for Canadian folks. Ours is the same for U.S. based. It is designed to follow them anywhere they work within the U.S. It also includes U.S. territories, which is additional benefit to some folks maybe traveling just outside or to Puerto Rico or one of the U.S. Virgin Islands. But yeah, it's designed for coverage within the country. So anytime you go outside of country, that's when you would talk to a local agent. First call, you can call our customer service line and have them give you some direct advice on who to reach out to. But if you have a local agent, that's the best person who can typically find you the best cost options to get that extension written.
Okay, and then what about, Joe, for our U.S. teachers who want to, record a video, stick it up on Instagram? They have no idea or no control over who is watching it anywhere in the world. Are they covered for that?
This is a question that gets brought up too, and those really need to be looked at on a one-on-one basis. And what I mean is that there's, our program, again, it's designed for folks all working within the United States. However, we've heard of circumstances where somebody outside of the United States brought a suit into the United States, which could allow it to be covered. It really, the instructor needs to be working within the United States. And, as a lot, you really don't have control over who sees your video. So that's again goes back. So again, for the coverage to kick in, we would need to look at that one-on-one and determine, if our coverage would work. But that again goes back to the importance of having a disclaimer or waiver to release the instructor of liability in case somebody does watch that video. So we highly recommend putting something on that video that would at least cause somebody to click in action to that suggests, I know the risks of this and I'm releasing the instructor of liability from those risks, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And I hear this more from our U.S. teachers. I hear more questions around that. And I feel like I'm covered on that. Is that, as a Canadian teacher, do I have this right that I can share, like, let's say a Instagram reel showing me doing some yoga pose and I'm covered, Beth, or do I have this wrong?
No, you're correct. If you have the international web-based consulting extension on the policy, then you are covered if you were to be brought into a lawsuit. The only thing is that lawsuit needs to be settled into a Canadian court.
Okay, let me clarify this. When you say it has to be settled within a Canadian court, let's say someone watches my Instagram reel and they fall and they hurt themselves at home, and then they are from a different country. They would have to come to Canada, get a lawyer here, get into the court system here in Canada to do this. Am I getting this right?
Sort of. It's kind of tricky. They'd have to file the suit in both countries. And then the Canadian court, though, would be the deciding factor of what happens. It obviously can get very costly when that happens. But from my understanding, yeah, they have to file the suit in both countries, or they need to find an international lawyer to file the suit in a Canadian court.
Joe, is it the same for our U.S. teachers?
It really needs to be looked at one-on-one before giving a blanket statement, but very, very similar to Beth that and what she mentioned that, potentially as long as we understand it, there's an opportunity to bring the lawsuit into the US and that could potentially afford coverage for it. But again, I don't want to overspeak. I'd be much more apt to allow one of our licensed agents who work in our customer service call center to answer the question about the specific incident for me to give a blanket statement that could be incorrect in certain circumstances. And I don't mean to be speaking insurance speak here. I just don't want to say something that's wrong, if that makes sense.
I appreciate that a lot. And I think it was in our previous episode with Beth, and we'll make sure to link to it in the show notes, where I feel like, Beth, if my memory serves me right, and I hope it does, I feel like you and I were talking in that episode about how important it is to record things when things happen in a yoga class. And so I just encourage our connected yoga teachers to also go and have a listen to that episode. If there is, I'm thinking more so in the studio if someone, slipped and fell, to make sure we record it and let our insurance company know.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I also agree with Joe. It is hard to sort of speak on the international as it does depend one-on-one on the situation. And it really depends on each different country. So it's hard to sort of give a overall statement on exactly what happens in each country, because each country has different laws as well.
So let's say then I decide, all right, I really want to do a retreat. We can travel a little bit more as of like when we're recording this episode today in June of 2022, Canada just lifted some more travel restrictions. This is happening around the world. So let's say our connected yoga teacher listeners decide, all right, I want to travel outside of my country and host a yoga teacher training or a retreat or something. I think I heard you both mention like a length of time. So let's talk about something that's like a month long versus a week long or a year. Does that make a difference? Joe, I'll ask you first. What would you say to a yoga teacher who said, I'm going and teaching this thing outside of the US, now what do I do?
Yeah. So what I recommend is if they're enrolled in our program, bring our policy, bring the certificate of insurance to a local agent and let them know what their plans are, what they're going to be doing, what the retreat's about, who's going to be coming, how many people, what the activities are going to be there. And they can write up, and typically, by the way, at a very low cost, a short-term policy that will cover their trip overseas and the liability involved. And, there's even some additional liabilities needed based on either the country code or what's happening. You might need some additional rental insurance for the space that you're renting or event insurance, things like that. So there's always, it's always a good idea, by the way, to whatever event you're doing, if it's outside of your normal scope of practice, to talk to an agent, let them know everything that you're doing, see if your policy covers it, or if you need to get some additional riders. In terms of the overseas thing, whether it's for our policy, whether it's 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, 2 months, definitely go to a local agent. Just let them know what you're doing, let them know the time frame, and they can typically write you something that's affordable and will cover you for that, for that length of time.
Okay, so that would count for our connected yoga teachers who say, I know some people have reached out lately this month and said, I am based in the US, but I'm moving, to this other country for a year and I want to teach there. So they would still be insured with you, take that policy and go find a local person I'm just wondering what you would do, Joe, as a yoga teacher, and Beth, I'll ask you next. Would you start to look into this before you travel, or would you wait until you get somewhere?
I would definitely, if you have the ability to plan ahead, that's always better. And the local agent might send you to connect with somebody, to a local agent from the country you're moving to. But you mentioned a year-long trip. Our entire program is our policy period is a full year. So in that length of time, in those scenarios, you might be better suited finding a local, hopefully group policy built in that space that's similar to what we built here in the US, that you might be able to find affordably. And the reason I say a group policy is if you go to a local agent and try to get something written like we've written for the community, it typically can cost hundreds upon hundreds of dollars, if not thousands. And by the way, that's how much liability insurance used to cost before, companies like ours or Beth's, built the technology that really changed the way it was purchased and built them as group policies. So that, that's why you're able to get these programs for, in some cases, less than $200 or around that cost for an entire year. So if you were going overseas for a year, I would highly recommend looking to see if there's any programs similar to ours in that country, because that might be your best option. But if it's shorter than that, or if it's some short-term thing, I highly recommend talking to a local agent, showing them what you already have, and seeing if they can extend it to that country.
I'm popping in here for a moment, Connected Yoga Teachers, to tell you about OfferingTree. Yes, they sponsor the podcast, and that brings it to your ears right now today. But I also use OfferingTree myself, and I wouldn't bring a sponsor here on the podcast if it wasn't something that I really trusted, used, and loved, and was already talking about. So like I said earlier in today's episode, I'm teaching a 6-week Yoga for Pelvic Health series. And as you listen now, it's already started because I'm recording this a little bit before we start. And I'm so glad that I chose to use OfferingTree to get everyone paid and registered, mainly because everything is so automatic. So Zoom links go out with reminder emails, people sign up and pay online, waiver forms and legal releases are all integrated and automatic. And the main thing that I am loving, I have to tell you about this week, is that my class times are showing up in the time zone where people are. So let's say someone lives on the West Coast of US or Canada and they're in Pacific time. They would see that class begins at 6:30 a.m. for them. It's 9:30 a.m. for me here in Eastern time. But because it shows up in their time zone, the magic of computers, and their computer knows what time zone they're in, and it shows up in their time zone, it means that I don't have to do any time zone math. It's really inclusive this way. It shows up for people. I had someone reach out this week and they said, "Hey, Shannon, does that class start at 2:30 in the afternoon?" And I was like, "I know that it's at 9:30 Eastern, and it should be showing up in your own time zone." So they're like, "Yes, that is exactly when it is. And that is the perfect time for me." I just think it's brilliant how OfferingTree has created it to do that. So if you want to focus more on teaching yoga and less on the tech side of things, like all of the Zoom integration and emails and payments and time zones, less on that side of things, check out OfferingTree. Our listeners get a special discount over at offeringtree.com/Shannon. Now let's get back into our conversation about insurance with Joe and Beth. Okay, Beth, what are your thoughts? If I want to go away for a whole year and I want to teach while I'm there, what are my steps?
I 100% agree with Joe on that. I think if you're going to be going for a full year, our program also, our policy covers you for a year. So you'd be better off to seek out a local broker there and see if you can get a policy that will cover you for the whole year while you're traveling away. If it is a shorter amount of time, I would recommend contacting us because, like I said, our insurer does do a certain amount of time depending on the situation. We can also try and look for somebody else that might cover it. It is a hard, international is a very hard product to find, unfortunately, but we would definitely try. If not, then we would suggest that you try local.
Okay, so I would call then you you personally, Beth. No, I'm just kidding. I would call you, though, my insurance company, and I would explain like the length of time. And am I hearing you say that you would then connect with someone else in that in that other country that I'm traveling with? Is that
No,
no?
We would look for if we could find an insurance provider here in Canada or one of our markets to see if any of them have a product that would cover whatever your situation is or whatever you're doing outside of Canada is what we would do. If we couldn't, then we would advise you to go local.
Okay. And is this the same if we move somewhere? Is it exactly the same as traveling? Like, really, let's say I'm a Canadian citizen, but let's say I move to the US.
Right.
Is it the same thing as if I was traveling?
That's when I tell you to call Joe. If you're moving outside of Canada, we only cover you as long as you're in Canada and living in Canada. So if you were moving to the US, then I would have connected you with Joe at that point and told you that you're better off to get a policy through him.
And Joe, would you then say I have to be a US citizen, or it's just if I'm residing in the US, it's fine?
If you are legally living and working in the US, you don't have to be a US citizen to be able to legally be covered by our program. It's our program. The only stipulations is that you are legally working in the space that we're covering you for. That you're doing things legally. So a lot of times that can come on a visa or a short term. I'm not exactly sure what the language looks like. But to Beth's point too, if you're moving somewhere. As much as we'd love to retain you as a customer, it just wouldn't really make sense for us to continue to enroll you in our program if you were, full time in another country. And we would, now that we're a part of a bigger network under, a brokerage that extends globally, we may have some resources internally that we can connect you with overseas to get a policy built. But in a lot of cases, there may be a competing program to ours, or not competing program to ours, but just a program similar to ours written in that other country that might be your best option.
This is so helpful. Is there anything else that you can think of around teaching online to people outside of your country, or traveling and teaching, or moving and teaching? Are there any other questions that people ask you, or anything else that you hope yoga teachers know? Joe, I'll let you take that one first.
Sure. Well, interestingly enough, in our space, not every program even offers coverage online. Now, a lot of them since the pandemic have added that, but it is a question you absolutely should ask the agent from which you're purchasing insurance. So, my advice, and this really is kind of blanket advice, isn't necessarily just for if you're teaching internationally, but anytime you're enrolling in insurance based on your business, you really need to take a full audit of everything that you're doing, bring that information to that call. And then when you speak to the agent, just fire off questions about everything you're doing, whether it's in the US, whether it's outside of the US, what the practices are going to look like, and just make sure you're getting a policy that can cover all of the elements of your business. Where I'm going with that is I just recommend over asking questions, and don't just rely on one. If you're reaching out to us, which I recommend because we have a great program, ask the questions, but also go and ask 2 or 3 other competing programs, because we aren't a one size fits all. There's some other policies out there that might work better for your business, and we are going to be very open and palms up about that, because we only want to enroll customers that we are the right solution for. So just, ask the questions, and even ask the agents and let me know what I'm not asking. And typically I know at least our folks are very open and honest about, the questions you should be asking and whether or not we are the right solution.
That's great. Anything that you can think of, Beth?
I totally agree with Joe. It's making sure that give us all the details of what you're doing. And often we find that there'll be a yoga instructor yoga is their main thing, but they might do something else smaller on the side and still running it under their yoga business. For example, even if you're selling products or you're Reiki practitioner and doing Reiki on the side, making sure that we know every single detail of your business structure, because that's the only way that we can properly make sure that you're insured. Anytime you add something to your business, make sure you just give us a call or an email and let us know what you're adding or what you're changing about your business structure, just so we can make sure that you're still falling within the scope of the policy and that there's nothing more that you might need. Oversharing is the best way to make sure that you have the right policy that fits for you.
I have to highlight that I really appreciate when my insurance renewal comes up, the detailed form that you send out from BrokerLink, formerly Lackner McLennan. I have to keep reminding myself of this. It's so helpful because I feel like over the years I've seen you add a lot of questions in there. Like, do you offer anything else? And then all of a sudden there's a little pop-up like, oh, if you are teaching online, then make sure you have this. It's really handy. And yes, just call and ask the questions. I mean, both Joe and Beth, this is their day-to-day job answering these questions. And I just really appreciate that because I think it's important for us to be covered as yoga teachers and to also view it as a real business. It's a real business. You need real insurance coverage. One other thing that I want to see if we have time for is waivers. Beth, do you want to talk about what you tell yoga teachers about waivers? And is there anything new now with COVID?
We are pro waivers. I think a lot of insurance companies are pro waivers. It helps in a lot of ways. It's just one of those other ways to secure you. We advise a lot of times that they either check with an association or check with a legal representative to see what exactly should be in the waivers. Disclaimers is another thing we often recommend, especially if you're doing online presence. Have a disclaimer in there, making sure you advise them that, if they aren't physically fit, they should be talking to a medical practitioner before doing the practice, things like that, just to make sure that they're fully covered. I mean, if you read an insurance form, there's disclaimers, there's waivers, all sorts of stuff on there, just to make sure that you're covered. So we do advise very much so that you use waivers and disclaimers.
Joe, what about the yoga teachers that reach out to Beyogi? What do you tell them about waivers?
Yeah, and I think this is a great question. Like Beth too, we highly recommend waivers. We are not. There are some insurance companies out there that actually require it. So that's another question to make sure you ask. Make sure that understand what the insurance company is going to require you do. Sometimes they will require you carry a waiver. We don't. We learned a whole heck of a lot about waivers in the last few years. And it really started with, we partnered with, it's actually a Canadian law firm, a law firm run out of Canada called Conscious Counsel, a gentleman named Corey Sterling who runs that program, and he has some other folks that work under him. We connected, we did some webinars together. He consulted with us and really gave us the insight on how to write a strong waiver designed for the fitness and or yoga business. And it really comes down to, there's a lot of details that need to be involved. There's waiver templates out there, but by no means do we recommend using a templated waiver. You could start with that, but they really need to be customized to your business. And I also highly recommend that you run that waiver by a counsel, by a lawyer that you may have on file. So that waiver is going to need to discuss the specifics of your business. And as I mentioned before, the risks of the practice, the outcomes, the potential outcomes, the release of liability, all of these things that are detailed and can really help a waiver. I'm going to say this analogy. I've been told this isn't a good analogy, but I'm going to say it anyway, just because I think it's topical and it's meaningful. Is the way I look at waivers almost like, if you look at the pandemic, the solutions that came out of the pandemic, masks were a thing that helped. And then the vaccines were kind of what came in as to be like the ultimate solution, hopefully. And I almost look at waivers almost like the mask, and insurance is like the vaccine, as in, waivers are there. It's a good layer of protection, but I do want to mention a waiver is not going to work in every scenario. If real negligence is found, a waiver is going to be thrown right out the window and a claim is going to be filed, and you are going to need the protection of insurance. And I'm not saying that to scare anybody. I'm just saying that's a reality of what this is. A waiver is a great protection that's going to keep you away from a significant amount of lawsuits. but when you really, really need it, it may not work, because if a real negligence was formed, if you did something wrong on accident, of course, people are going to have reason and reason and legal liability to sue you. So highly recommend you complement your insurance with a waiver, but even more important, complement your waivers with insurance. You did ask one other question, that how have waivers changed as a result of the pandemic? And one thing I want to mention too is another thing that you can put in waivers is release of liability from transmission of communicable diseases, which is something almost all liability policies exclude. And I just want to say that again, almost all liability policies exclude the coverage for the transmission of communicable diseases. It was always like that. That's not a response to the pandemic. That's just how policies are written. There's an exclusion typically written in. So if you are worried about, COVID or anything else that might, there's, monkey flu coming out, there's all kinds of new stuff coming out. And, and it's obviously more on people's minds now. So highly adding that is another piece to your waiver is releasing you of liability from transmission of communicable diseases.
Okay, so let me just clarify that, Joe. Insurance is not covering that. They never have. So if someone came to a yoga class with one of our connected yoga teachers, got COVID, and said, I got it here at this yoga class, the insurance doesn't cover it, but the waiver and them signing that waiver and saying, like, I understand this releases that would help. Am I getting that right?
You are. Yeah. That's what I was saying. And, interestingly enough, in a pandemic like environment, it's really hard to find the ultimate cause of a transmission. So as I understand it, claims of this nature are very few and far between. And it's really tough to actually push a lawsuit through. But, it's always a good idea to have something in writing that releases the instructor of liability. That way it doesn't even ever get to the point of a potential claim being filed. And yes, and you said the word never, and I'm just cautious to use the word never, because we did find a program out there it wasn't in our yoga space. It was in a different ancillary health and wellness space. And they had a very, very old policy for, years and years and years. And there was no exclusion written in for transmission of communicable diseases. So as soon as the pandemic hit, they started advertising that they cover it. And they were right, because there was no written in exclusion. Now their underwriters have been fighting them ever since to try to get them to to change the language in their policy as a response to the pandemic. So I even think they are no longer able to do it. But in a general sense, and Beth, I don't want to speak for you because I'm not sure if this is within your policy, but I know ours and the other ones we've looked at in the space, they all have, is that I've seen, an exclusion for coverage for transmission of communicable diseases.
Yeah, Beth, what do our Canadian yoga teachers do? Do we change anything on our waiver, or do you suggest anything around that?
Our policy is the same. There is that exclusion in there. Again, it's such a blanket sort of statement to use. Like, if I would be cautious, and I would definitely use a waiver in that sense. But as far as the claim concerns, it would have to be looked at one-on-one.
Wow, I'm just thinking how a lot has changed since our previous interview. That was the world where we were living in, of no pandemic, no COVID pandemic. It really has impacted how yoga teachers share yoga and what we're thinking about. And I'm glad that our connected yoga teachers have these questions, about teaching internationally, online or in person. And I'm so grateful to both of you for being here for this today. I wanted to clarify, Joe, did you say you do have a resource with Corey? Did you do an interview with Corey or record that, or do you have a piece of content?
We do. We actually have a templated waiver too in our program too. So when you enroll into our program, one benefit of the program that we run here at Beyogi is that we go to great lengths to provide additional member benefits to our customers. One of the reasons being, and I don't mind saying this out loud, is that, our program offers liability insurance, and insurance is a strange thing for people to buy. You're buying something you hope you never use. And that's psychologically, that's not a fun decision to make. It is extraordinarily important, but it is kind of weird to buy something you hope you never use. So anyway, we go to great lengths to provide additional value into our program to make it hopefully not such a burdensome line item every year when you have to renew. Things like discounts on, by the way, we have group rates on dental insurance, vision insurance, all these additional kind of employee benefits, discounts on industry specific tools and resources. But we also have a bunch of free items in there. One of them is a waiver template. but I put a big asterisk on that, because a waiver template, all that is a guideline. You really need to customize it to your business. And yes, through our webinar that we did with Corey, that is recorded. It can be found somewhere on the Beyogi site. There's also been some additional pieces of content that we've worked on together with him. So if you go to Beyogi and you look at our blog and content, there's a ton of resources there that really help our instructors, not only building an LLC, filing their taxes, creating waivers, questions to ask during instruction. We really do try to provide them the questions that they might, answers to questions they didn't get during their yoga teacher training, but really may need during, to help them succeed in business, if you will.
That's great. We'll link to anything you have in the show notes. And I want to give a shout out to Lizzie, who's here, also from Beyogi, totally in the background. Lizzie has said, please don't ask me any questions. Lizzie collects a lot of this content, and I see it on the Beyogi site. And it was interesting, our listeners know that I'm Canadian. I call Beth when I have questions, and I really understand our Canadian insurance company here. And then I was getting to know Beyogi, and someone said to me, did you know it's kind of like a membership? Like there's a lot more there. So thank you for explaining that our members can get discounts and different things there, and also helpful resources. Beth, do you have anything to share in terms of, is there a template that you give to yoga teachers who want to make up their waiver, or will we lean on Beyogi for this one?
We don't have a template, but with our policy, you do have access to lawyers. So we have a group of lawyers that work for the insurance company. So whenever you have a question, there's a 24/7 line that you can actually contact them, and they will help give you advice and guide you to where you need to go.
I had no idea, Beth. You mean I can 24? I could show one of those lawyers my waiver and be like, how's this look?
Yeah, they'll give you advice on waivers. They'll give you advice on reading if you're getting into a lease and what kind of things you need to look out for. That's what they're there for. And if you think you have a potential claim and you're not quite sure what to do, you can call them and they'll give you advice on whether or not you should put the claim through, or whatever legal advice you need.
Joe and Lizzie, are you jotting this down as a next thing to add to Beyogi, or do you have this?
I just jotted that down. No, it's of course we have lawyers on file too, but their role typically is to help once a claim is filed. I love that benefit that you're offering to your customers, Beth, and I immediately going to look into seeing how we can add that type of resource. It can typically be a very expensive component for a lot of folks when they just need a little bit of advice. So to be able to offer that resource to your customers is such a value. Love what you guys do. And I hope you don't mind that. A lot of times we really look at what you do and say, hey, can we try to do that same thing? I feel like, what do they say that, copying is the best form of flattery. That's not the right language, but
flattery.
we want to copy what you do, Beth, because you do great work.
Oh, thank you so much. That means a lot. And like I said, you and I have been having this back and forth relationship for a while now. And I'm so happy that we have someone in the US that we trust and can send our clients to.
Likewise, very much. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. This has been amazing. I've learned a lot. I hope this helps our connected yoga teachers. And if you listen to this episode and you're like, okay, I have more questions, we can jump on here again and answer those questions. So make sure to put them on our show notes page, post your questions there. And just thank you, Joe and Beth, for all of your time today and the work that you do.
Oh, thank you for having us.
Yes, no, of course, my pleasure. We appreciate it. And of course, through this wonderful relationship we have with you, folks can enroll under beyogi.com/connected yoga teacher. And there's on that site too, there's access to find a general chat where you can chat with a customer service agent, or there's a phone number you can reach out to us anytime. And we're delighted to answer any questions that you have. And again, Shannon, thank you for this opportunity.
And Beth, where do people go? We'll make sure we put the link in the show notes. Where do they find BrokerLink? You have the best website, but I don't want to mess it up.
We do. It's www.ineedapolicy.com. Very easy. You can go online. You can get us at info@ineedapolicy.com. If you just want to shoot out a quick email, if you have any questions, we have a team of of brokers here that specialize in complementary health that are always on that website or on that email, ready to answer any questions that you might have before you're ready to commit to the policy. You can apply right online. We try and have those certificates out to you within 24 to 48 hours. If we have any questions, we'll reach out to you directly. If you have any questions, we have, like I said, a full team of people who specialize in complementary health, ready to take your questions.
This has been amazing. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Joe and Lizzie from Beyogi and Beth. What a fantastic podcast. So packed with information. Thank you for answering my questions, even when I know it is tough to give, general answers about insurance. My key takeaway here, Connected Yoga Teachers, is to reach out to your insurance company and just check in. Let them know about your business design. Let them know about the framework. Let them know what you're sharing and make sure that you are covered for those things. And also, look at how I got talking with Beth, and I had no idea, even though I use BrokerLink, formerly Lackner and McLennan, even though I use this company for my own insurance as a yoga teacher, I had no idea that I had 24/7 access to a lawyer and could get my waiver forms looked at. That is worth a lot. So that's why, even though we feel like, oh gosh, do I want to talk about insurance today? Do I want to call the company? You know what? People like Joe and Beth are there to help you, to really figure out what's the best fit for you, to make sure that you're covered when you travel, to make sure that you're covered if you're teaching online. And they're a great resource, so reach out to them. I also want to say thank you so much to all of you who left a comment after our last episode on insurance, left a comment there in the show notes. We kept looking at those and we're not ever ignoring your questions. A lot of them were about teaching abroad, and slowly we put this episode together. Sometimes it takes us some time to get your questions answered, but I just wanted to say thank you, because your questions, if you have a question, there's 10 other yoga teachers who have the same question. And that's really the fuel for our podcast. So you make this happen. You also make it happen by listening. So I also want to say thank you for doing that all the way to this point today, where we've talked all about insurance and really hopefully not overwhelmed you. Please note, if you go to our show notes page, theconnectedyogateacher.com/287 for today's episode, we will link to the discount code if you want to sign up with Beyogi. We'll also link to the discount code with OfferingTree, our sponsor, and anything else we talked about today, as well as we have clickable timestamps. So our amazing show notes writer, Crunch, shout out to Crunch, does a fantastic job of summarizing things so that you can find the spot that you're looking for. So let's say you had a question about teaching online to people who are outside of your country. You'll be able to skim the show notes and go back to that spot exactly. So again, that's over at theconnectedyogateacher.com/287. And if you're listening on the go, you can go to our website, type in insurance in the search bar, and it will find all of our podcasts and articles about insurance. If you want to hang out together this fall, Connected Yoga Teachers, I am hanging out a lot in Pelvic Health Professionals. So to find me over there, go to pelvichealthprofessionals.com. And we have some amazing guest speakers and some amazing resources in there. And like I said, I'm teaching my 6-week Yoga for Pelvic Health series. And then we have some cool things coming up. I can't tell you yet, but I will tell you soon. I'm also going to be a student at the Accessible Yoga Teacher Training. So I'll make sure to link to that in our show notes as well, in case you want to show up together. It's a virtual training, so you can show up anywhere from in the world. And I'm just super grateful that Jeevana Heyman and the Accessible Yoga team have put this together. I'm really excited about being the student. It has been a long time. I'm trying to think when the last time was that I attended a yoga teacher training. Also, if you want to support the podcast, That link to the accessible yoga training in our show notes for today's episode is an affiliate link. That means that you don't pay anything extra to sign up, but our podcast gets a little bit of support. Some of you ask me, how can I support the podcast? That's one way to do it if you were going to take a yoga teacher training, and also tell other yoga teachers about it. Tag us in a social media post, leave us a review. All of those ways are also great ways to support the podcast. Next week on the podcast, we are going to talk about Shavasana, also known as Shavasana, all the way up until this interview that I did with Indu Aurora. I cannot believe, what are we at today? Episode 287. So for 287 weeks, we've put a podcast out and we've never done a full episode on Shavasana. And I think we deserve it, especially if you're here now all the way to the very end of a long, long discussion about insurance. We deserve some relaxation next week. So I'll see you back here next week. And a shout out of thank you to our entire team over here who made today's episode possible. Suzanne, Crunch, and Sinead, thank you so much. And dear listener, as I sign off today, I would like to leave you with a question. What will you be doing this week to stay connected to yourself, your yoga practice, and to your community so that you can share the yoga that lights you up?